we're talking about power and money here, okay? It's not the common man that runs America. It's the bankers and politicians. What's best for the people that are running the country is to maintain the dollar reserve standard, because that allows them to print all the money they want and hand it out to their friends and their cronies and the corporations that will give them benefits.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome, Reluctant Preppers. Today our guest is Andy Hoffman, Media Director for Miles Franklin, expert in precious metals markets as well as a market analyst in general. Andy, thank you for joining us today.
Always a pleasure.
We're hoping you can talk with us today to put some specific facts and understanding behind the gap between what people sense is actually happening in the world versus what we're being told. Because when those two don't match, we're concerned that to really take care of our families, we need to act in accordance with reality, what actions businesses and countries are actually taking and banks are actually taking, so that we can position our families for the best safety and security and success of securing our livelihood going forward. There's so many examples that it's hard to know where to begin. Perhaps a very simple one would be a lot of people have been hearing about dramatic, unprecedented actions of the Federal Reserve in our money supply recently in terms of quantitative easing or flooding the system with additional currency, and also then tapering or stopping doing that as though the problems have been solved and now the medicine isn't needed anymore because the patient's all getting better. Can you give us some insight into the reality of what's going on in that area?
You mean you think that the government and the Fed are lying? Is that what you're saying? That can't happen. Well, look, the way
I'm interested in the truth.
Yeah, the way I put it is I call it the evil troika, which would be Washington, Wall Street, and the mainstream media, and their job for different reasons, all basically regarding money and power, is to put out a facade of an alternate world, such as one in which there's a 7% unemployment rate, when the real numbers show that it's more like 25%. Or in the case of the Federal Reserve, I mean, I wrote an article called Proof of the Tapering Mirage a few months back. I think it was in December. And basically, it literally proved that it's a lie that they were doing $85 billion per month. I mean, the simple math showed that they were doing more like $130 billion a month. And you know how I did that math? With their own numbers. They were showing that the Fed puts out a chart of their balance sheet. And it was showing how the balance sheet was exponentially rising last year with the, based on the amount of QE. The problem is that since Treasury bonds at the end of last year got hammered, there was a huge correction. Clearly, if their balance sheet really got that large, they were buying more than they said they were. I mean, it's simple math. And as for what's going on now with this tapering, it's even more comical that just as they say that they start to taper, miraculously, the tiny little nation of Belgium bought $150 billion worth of Treasury bonds just in the last 3 months. Yes, this is a country that's no bigger than 35 of the United States states. And we're supposed to believe that coincidentally, the country that just happens to be the headquarters of the European Union was buying hand over fist, launching it into third place or fourth place on the global list of U.S. Treasury holders. Number one and two, of course, are China and Japan, both of which are sellers. Number three is a group called the Caribbean Bank Centers, which suddenly showed up about 10 years ago out of nowhere. Again, it's the same kind of thing. It's backdoor QE. It's simply offshore Treasury buying of government Fed buying of Treasury bonds, whether it's the ECB doing it themselves or funded by the Fed, I don't know. But it's simple math. It's their numbers that are out there for the world to see.
And a lot of that information is pretty advanced to most folks who live their ordinary lives and don't understand sort of big global banking schemes that are going on. The other arena that we've heard a very mixed message compared to what we're seeing is regarding precious metals. People have thought for thousands of years, and ever since the United States Depression and so on, people have been aware that gold, even we have it in our language, sayings like "you're worth your weight in gold," or "he's as good as gold," or "we're golden." People have long held the agreed upon sense that there's value there and there's worth there in gold. But for example, in testimony in front of Congress, former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke was sitting across from Congressman Ron Paul at the time, who was holding up a silver coin and asking Ben Bernanke if this was money, and Ben Bernanke said no, and it doesn't really concern the Fed because it's not that important. At the same time, we keep seeing news stories that different central banks, whether it's in Europe or in Asia, are hoarding gold and collecting it and buying it at record numbers. Can you talk a little bit about this big disconnect between what we're being told versus what the actions are actually speaking louder than words about this head fake about precious metals, whether it's real money, and what the world banks and other large holders are actually doing with it?
Right. Well, actually, if you watch that clip, it's funny because Bernanke almost said yes. And actually, you're referring to when Ron Paul actually said, "Is gold money?" He did at one point show him a silver coin at another hearing, but at that point he said flat out, "Is gold money?" And Bernanke hesitated for quite some time, trying to figure out how to answer it before he realized his job is to say no.
Okay.
But I mean, look, I mean, again, it's just so blatant. I mean, for him to say no when at the same time you're seeing the central banks buying it hand over fist. Not us, of course. We've sold off our hoard, which is why when the Germans are trying to get their 300 tons back, we've only given them 5 because we've already secretly sold ours off to defend the dollar. The Fed and the banks that own the Fed run the nation, and what makes them powerful and rich is having a fiat-based standard so they can create the money. So we, as the holder of the reserve currency, have the most to lose, and that's why we will sell every ounce of our gold secretly if we have to maintain this facade as long as we can. Of course, it's quite obvious it's a zero-sum game if we sell someone's buying, and clearly that buying has been not just with individuals but with central banks. The Chinese bought a record amount in 2013, double the amount they bought in the previous record of 2012, and this year they're on a pace to beat that record. And the same goes for silver. Or even here in the States, where the propaganda has been so knee-deep, anti-precious metals, the U.S. Mint had record sales last year, and they're 30% above that level this year, even though they're rationing this year. And of course, we've seen record demand in India, even with the tariffs for silver, nearly so for gold, the Russians, the Arabs, you name it. So again, look, the definition of money, which is the first thing I put in any one of my presentations, is not only does it have to be a medium of exchange, but it has to be a medium of exchange universally, which dollars are not. It has to be fungible, which frankly, dollars are not so much anymore because there's so many different kinds of dollars, and a lot of countries don't even want them. They have to, more importantly, be a storage of value, which they certainly haven't done, and they have to be quantifiable, meaning we know how many there are out there. So when it comes to money, the only substances that have actually that have succeeded in doing this throughout history are physical gold and silver. Decidedly not fiat currency, and frankly, for that matter, Bitcoin is even less the definition of money than dollars are. So yes, the Fed will defend itself by lying, cheating, and stealing about the definition of money and what it's doing with its gold. But the fact is, it's pretty obvious that on a global basis, it's desired far more than any fiat currency ever has been.
Now, I want to press you on one point you made because I think it's critical for everyone to understand that, and that is when you talked about why the United States is behaving differently from the countries that are hoarding gold, why we're selling off ours. This, to a common folks, makes no sense whatsoever. If you want to maintain strength for your family, you try to build up your nest egg. So why in the world would the United States be selling off our nest egg? And who is that benefiting? And how is that transferring? How does that transfer the balance of power going forward in the world?
Right. Well, again, we're talking about power and money here. Okay. It's not the common man that runs America. It's the bankers and politicians that run America. And of course, the Federal Reserve is owned by the bankers. And so are the politicians, as they are one of the largest lobbies. So what's best for America is not what's best for the common man. And what's best for the people that are running the country is to maintain the dollar reserve standard, because that allows them to print all the money they want and hand it out to their friends and their cronies and the corporations that will give them benefits. So they continue to do what it takes to keep the dollar as the reserve standard. And the main way to do that is to make sure that people don't want an alternative currency. Because let's face it, there's no other, every currency in the world for the first time in history is backed by nothing. So it's not like people are going to race out of dollars and into euros. The euro is an even bigger mess than the dollar is, and for that matter, the yen and even the Chinese yuan, which is purposely being devalued right now, and it's already pegged to the dollar. So which way do you think it's going to go? The fact is, only gold and silver are real money, and if there's a flight to gold and silver, people around the world will realize this, and it'll accelerate the end of the ill-fated fiat dollar standard. I mean, every fiat currency in history has failed. So what they do is they sell off the gold secretly. They're certainly not going to tell us that they're doing it, so that it's the demand around the world is satisfied and they can keep the price down. And again, by the way, there have been plenty of admissions throughout the government from Greenspan on down of sales, but the mainstream media doesn't like to report these things.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could give a little bit of sort of factual teeth to that,
Sure.
Because otherwise, one of the things we're here about is to try to not be conspiracy theorists,
Exactly.
but instead to talk about what's real. So give us some of the reality around the.
I mean, what I talk about, why my blog is so popular and the Miles Franklin blog in general is because we focus on truth. And the same goes for GATA, which is the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, which is where I started writing a decade ago. We don't do conspiracy about anything, and that's why when people email me about, well, what do you think about what the government is doing here and the Bilderbergs and the Rothschilds, I said that there's no fact, that's speculation. When it comes to gold, the fact that if you do the math, the simple math that shows how much the U.S. says it exports and how much it produces, obviously the gold has to come from somewhere. Or if you just look at Alan Greenspan saying back in 10 years ago, the U.S. stands ready to lease gold in increasing quantities if the price rises. And the IMF, which makes the rules for central bank gold holdings, saying that you're allowed to lease your gold out but still double count it and say that you still own it. Or how about Paul Volcker saying we should have suppressed the price of gold when it was surging. There was a mistake not to. Or better yet, when the Washington Agreement was signed in the year 2000 and gold surged, and the head of the Bank of England, his name was Eddie George, said, we were looking at the abyss as the price rose. One or more banks would have gone bankrupt. So together, the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, and other central banks pushed the price down to save the system. I mean, these are real quotes. This is evidence that's out there, and there's far more of that. And then again, all you have to do is watch the trading action, which I've been reporting on faithfully every day for a decade. I mean, we're talking about, as they call it, Six Sigma events on a daily basis, like silver falling at least 2% intraday on more than half of all trading days.
And just to clarify for folks who are listening, a Six Sigma event means something that is so statistically unlikely that in quality control of products, you consider that to be like excellent quality control. If you can get to where your products only fail on a Six Sigma basis, it means they practically never fail. So what you're talking about is things that are so unlikely to happen that the frequency with which you're seeing them means there's got to be something else going on other than just normal market action.
Yeah, 6 standard deviations from the mean, which essentially, I did the math, I think it would mean these things should happen only once in like 10 million trading days. And yet they happen 90% of the time on multiple. I can list them all now, but the point is, if there's anyone out there that believes that what I'm saying is conspiracy, then please give me a call or read my blog. There couldn't be more evidence. There couldn't be more motivation. It's kind of like a police case where the wife did it, and that it was done for money, and you have admissions of it. It's not a conspiracy.
And this sounds serious for a couple of reasons. One is that if we're doing what you're talking about as a country, we're acting directly against the real interests of our country, of the people of our country, that what we're doing is undermining our financial security as a people? And is it not also undermining our political power and our political clout and leverage going forward? I mean, recently there was a standoff over in the Middle East, and where it seemed like we drew this so-called red line in the sand, and then it was said, well, after all, it just things went ahead and nothing happened. And it seemed that some of the people were even in Crimea and in Russia, there was this sense that if we try to impose sanctions, our financial vulnerability is so great that the Russians could turn around and cause serious harm to our economy as well.
Well, everything that we're doing right now is against the public interest. In fact, I wrote a piece the other day called "The Good Old Days," talking about 2008. When you look at our financial situation back then during the crisis and our political standing in the world, the level of inflation, the level of debt, and of course, as you talk about, yes, in Syria, our Nobel Peace Prize winning president. I mean, how many wars has he started or tried to start? And you know, this is the real fatal one. I mean, again, what he failed at in Syria and Iran, he's doing so 10 times more in the Ukraine. I mean, he's alienated Russia and China, and he's fostered there's all these new anti-dollar trade agreements that have been signed just in the last 2 months alone. And again, you know, standing up against Vladimir Putin couldn't be a worse decision for this country. But, you know, across the board, all the taxes that are increased, the Obamacare, you know, the executive decrees that take away our civil rights, and of course the market manipulation led by, of course, QE, which simply creates inflation and increases the wealth disparity between the 1% and the rest. So there hasn't been anything done in this nation's best interest in a decade, and increasingly so, sadly.
Well, even the very mechanism of pushing down prices of gold by sort of selling ahead future contracts or promises to repay. I'll promise I'll give you gold tomorrow if you let me pretend I'm selling it today. Even that mechanism seems fraught with, it's basically robbing ourselves, and it seems like we're pushing down the price so that other countries can stockpile and hoard the very real asset that we should be hoarding at a lower price. It's like we're just slitting our own throat there. I mean, how is this not I don't even know how to ask it.
It's called kicking the can. I mean, it's that simple. It's not like, I mean, believe me, I mean, it is possible that some of these super bankers actually believe their own BS, that they're doing the right thing and that it's smart. But what it comes down to it is most of them are not dumb. They realize this is just a can-kicking exercise. The way I put it is, you know, they wake up, you know, when some people say, well, they have this grand plan to do this. No, they don't. I think they wake up every single day playing defense on how to maintain the system a little longer. I wrote today of how they, you know, at the end of 2008, they did all this money printing. By 2011, the whole system was falling apart again. So they said, well, what do we do now? Okay, well, let's double up on the money printing. Let's do QE3 and let's do the LTRO in Europe and Abenomics. And let's decide after, for instance, last year, they had that closed-door meeting between Obama and all the bank CEOs, and the next day gold fell $250. So, you know, we can't just just attack gold a little bit. We got to do it all the time because it keeps popping its head up. And we know that ultimately, by pushing it down this low, we've created this ridiculous physical demand, and supply is collapsing with the mining industry. But it buys us a little more time. And behind the scenes, you can bet that those people are stocking up for it personally. I'm sure they're buying gold and silver, and they are preparing for the very same things that we are preparing for. But right now, they are able to, you know, to continue this game a little longer because, again, if they take it's like a car. If they take their foot off the gas pedal, it stops. I mean, they have to keep manipulating every market, not just gold. They have to. I wrote a piece called 3.0% Enough Said. They can't let the 10-year Treasury bond, which is the most benchmarked in the world, go over 3% yield. They can't let gold get any momentum at all, and they certainly can't let the stock market, which is the only, or as I call it, the Dow Jones propaganda average, which is the only real, quote, positive factor out there that gives anyone any kind of belief something's positive going on. They can't let it fall. And that's why you see these Six Sigma events in all of these markets on a daily basis.
I'm glad you brought up debt, because that's the next thing I wanted us to look at. Again, big disconnect between people's gut about what they were always taught from their grandparents to their parents, and in their own responsible approach to life, to know that debt weakens you. Yes, it enables you sometimes to speed up some particular acquisition or some action you want to take. You want to build something fast, you want to grow fast. It can give you a little leverage, but it cuts both ways, and it's a long-term ball and chain. And people know that instinctively. They've seen what's happening with people's student loan debts coming to be just a crushing burden on. We've got close people that we know who are still carrying, and will be for 10 more years. Big student loan debts. It's affecting whether they can buy homes or not, et cetera. Household debt. Not only what happened with a lot of people losing their homes in the 2008 crisis, but it's continuing to be something that common people are wising up to it, or those who know the truth is that it can be just extremely toxic to the stress in the home and marriages and the family life and everything, and how important household debt is. And corporations, wiping out pension plans that they can't afford to pay and that sort of thing. But so people have seen in their real world that bankruptcy or debting has ruined people's lives, or put huge loads of stress, weakening people. And yet our country is acting like it doesn't matter. You can just pile up as much debt as you want, and it just doesn't matter. So are they able to get away with that, kicking that can, because they keep driving the interest rate down, or how are they able to suspend reality?
That's the whole point. I mean, look, debt is the natural check on what they're doing. I mean, printing money is creating debt. And of course, in printing money, you create inflation and you create weak economic conditions, which create the need for more money printing, such as for entitlements and fiscal spending packages, et cetera. And then, of course, creating the debt, creates upward pressure on interest rates, which only increase the debt more, because you have to borrow more money to pay the interest, et cetera, which is why they know that they have to keep interest rates low. But of course, in doing that creates more debt. So again, I mean, it's a vicious circle that ultimately ends the same way. I mean, it's what they call a Ponzi scheme. It can only grow larger. There's whether the Fed is tapering or not, and I believe that they're not even close to it. I think they're literally just saying it, and as long as stock markets are higher, they feel like they can get away with saying it, even though they're clearly not doing it, because the foreigners are clearly selling. They're saying we're selling Treasury bonds, and the only people buying have been the Fed in Belgium. So they can say what they're doing, but clearly they have to keep printing money. They can't stop. Look at yesterday's GDP number, 0, essentially. This is what QE got us. It's 0 right now in Japan. It's 0 right now in Europe. And it's collapsing in China. Everywhere they printed more money than in history. And there's no growth of any kind. Of course, all those numbers that they print, by the way, are lies anyway. They're all fabricated. They use ridiculously low inflation rates. I mean, we are in a severely declining global economy. And as a result, the debts keep rising. So again, all they could do is play this little game of money printing, market manipulation, and propaganda. But the diminishing returns are quite obvious now, because not even the stock markets of the world, most of them aren't going up anymore, and everything else is going down while the debts keep rising. I mean, back in 2011, I'm talking about September 2011, when we had our crisis because they stripped our AAA rating. We had $14 trillion of debt. That wasn't even 3 years ago. We're at 17.6 right now, and rising rapidly. Plus, we have $5 trillion off balance sheet because of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Plus, we have all the unfunded liabilities, and all those things keep rising and rising and rising. So, no, they can keep trying to do it to buy a little more time, but ultimately the debt is what is going to destroy their game. And whether it's tomorrow or a year from now or 2 years from now, it will happen, because it always does the same way.
And in order to maintain some of that control and the distortions going forward, eventually it takes military force to do that, in addition to propaganda. In the example I wanted you to take a look at with us, if you would, is when in Iran, back to that situation, when Secretary of State John Kerry, this is on November 30th, was giving a speech of late last year. He was saying, okay, we've got this framework agreement worked out with them, and it's very detailed, but I only have time to give you the key points, the most important points in that. And he said that Iran can now sell oil, get cash, and buy gold and silver. So at the same time that the administration is saying gold and silver are not important, they're not money, they're slipped out there that one of the key points, one of the few key points of trying to negotiate with another country was that accommodating their desire to buy gold and silver. Why is that so important, and what does our military have to do with maintaining the status quo that you've been talking about?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what that agreement said. I highly doubt that any agreement that the U.S. signed would allow anyone to be trading in gold. That was the whole point of the attacks on Iraq, was we don't want them trading outside of the U.S. dollar, certainly not in the dollar's enemy, gold. But again, you talk about that agreement. That agreement has already been blown up. It took a week before it was blown up, and now Kerry doesn't even speak to the Russians about anything. There's such hatred there. So, I mean, look, we can, again, the whole theme of this is what we say and what we do. We can say all these things that we want done, but the fact is that we will not let anyone who tries to do anything outside of gold and silver, outside of the dollar, we shun. And as a result, just like telling a child that they can't do something, they're going to do it. I mean, if we're going to purposely devalue the dollar, which we're doing in grand scale between ZERP and QE, then people are going to stop using it. And that's exactly what's going on in the world. And, this whole thing with Ukraine has really started a whole new trend of new anti-dollar deals that started a few years ago. The BRICS and others. I mean, look, there's 599 currencies in fiat currency in history. Every one of them failed. And every one of the 180 currencies now are going to fail, too, for the same reason. So no matter what the machinations are and which currencies get together and last a little longer, it doesn't really matter. They're all going the same way. And frankly, they may all go at the same time. Remember, the dollar is the head. You kill the head, and the whole body dies.
So, Andy, we've talked about several examples of where things aren't as they seem to be. So, knowing that, what action steps can an ordinary person take to say, I'm not going to follow the propaganda, I'm going to take the right action that's going to lead my family to a safer spot?
Well, again, look, I dwell mostly in the financial realm, and that one's easy. I mean, you own real money. You got to realize that it's not an investment. The propaganda will say, well, gold and silver, they're investments and they're risky. Yes, mining shares are, ETFs are, because they're paper investments that go up and down and can be naked shorted. But when you have your savings in real money, in physical gold and silver, they're not going anywhere. The coins are fully paid for, and they're going to just sit there. And that's how you should view what you used to view your dollars, which now sit in risky banks that pay no interest, and it gets eaten up by inflation, and they can be bailed out and bailed in. Just sit there and hold real money. Over time, it has always protected you against inflation. And of course, your website about prepping, I mean, that's a big part. It's a comprehensive. To me, I just say, think of the worst case scenario. You don't have to prepare for your. I call it a protection continuum. I mean, everyone has their own level of comfort about how they can protect themselves. I say like a 1 on that scale would be to move into Manhattan and put all of your savings in cash in Citibank. And a 10 would be to move to a desert island, bury gold in the sand, and forage for food. So you have to determine how much you want to protect yourself. But at some point, you have to do something, because when we do have the inevitable currency crashes, there are going to be some major economic and social ramifications.
Well, Andy Hoffman, we know that time is short and we need to leave it there for today. We thank you so much for taking the time to join us and offer your perspectives on what's really going on versus what people are being told. We look forward to having you back again here sometime on Reluctant Preppers.
Look forward to it.
Thanks, Andy.